Time now to take a look back at the headlines of the week that we've been all talking about with our Reporters Rewind. Today's guests at the round table are Neil Vigdor. He is the political writer for Hearst Connecticut newspaper. Also with us is Aisha Harris, culture blogger for Slate.com, and finally political blogger and a Rise America friend, Wallace Ford. Welcome to all of you. Aisha's the only new one at the table, but it's good. Welcome back to you, and welcome for your first time.
Thank you.
Of course, the big news today that really been talking about all week long, toward the end of the week, was the anniversary of the assassination of JFK. First, it's hard to believe that it was 50 years ago. And it's very interesting to look back through that prism. Wallace, you were alive. Not to talk to the old man at the table.
It's quite all right. It's quite. I'm glad to be here.
But where were you? What do you remember?
I remember it, and you know, the Daily News has this the actual issue that came out the next day, and when you read through the paper, you really get that prism that you're talking about. I was 13 years old. I was in high school. I was on crutches from an injury, and so I was between classes, and we got this news that the president had been killed. And you know, I've been writing about the fact that depending on what age you were at today, it makes a big difference on how you look at it. People born before 1940, well, they had lived through the Great Depression, World War II. This was just another really sad burden to bear. People born after, let's say, 1955, if you're younger than 8, or, you know, like our guests here, and you, of course, yes.
Nice
I'm sorry. Thank you very much.
Whatever.
Yeah, right. You know, read about it in a history book, and it's like, well, Lincoln was assassinated, and there's the terrible things happen, but you don't cry reading a history book. But for those of us who really kind of, we're part of that dream, this ask not what this country can do for you, and the new frontier, and really believe that something new and different was going to happen, and bang, he's dead.
Yeah, and I want to swing to the other end of the pendulum, because Aisha is the youngest one at the table, and I think our young generation doesn't have the same enchantment, if you will, with JFK that some of us older folk do.
Yeah, I think that is true. I mean, I've kind of experienced a fatigue over the last few days of hearing about all of this, and I feel like the coverage has been really excessive in my opinion. But I can also understand why there is this obsession, because there is this mythology around the Kennedys. And I mean, for my generation, that would probably be something like 9/11 or Obama getting elected. Like, those are kind of the defining moments for, at least for me. I know like where I was when it happened, and I can recall it very vividly.
You know, it's so interesting, Neil. I wonder how history would regard JFK as a president had he lived through his second term.
Sure. I mean, he was much more fiscally conservative than I think that people look at him historically. He passed tax cuts. He was somewhat slow in terms of civil rights reforms. Really, it was kind of LBJ who kind of moved things along. But looking at it, kind of future politicians, many try to emulate JFK, and he really was the first president who harnessed the medium of television. If you go back to the debates of 1960, Kennedy against Nixon, Nixon really made a strategic error by agreeing to debate Kennedy and came across as tired and unprepared, and Kennedy looked youthful and eloquent, and really...
Did Nixon develop a flop sweat? Wasn't he very sweaty?
Right,
yeah,
right.
Just very
and he
uncomfortable.
wore this very kind of monochromatic suit that kind of that blended in with the set, and Kennedy had this a navy blue suit and looked crisp and rested and tanned. And Nixon, probably, if he had not agreed to debate, might have won the presidential election.
Yeah. But one thing, and I'll say to Aisha's point about excessiveness, and the reason why I'm sure it seems excessive, remember those dates I talked about, from 1940 to 1955, that's the huge chunk of the baby boomers, okay, who are, the baby boomers are basically kind of have been the tail that's wagged the American dog, if you will, because it's the largest demographic group in terms of this country's population. So yes, it's the people who have been most impacted by it, happen to also be the largest population group. And so that's why I'm sure why it seems excessive. It'll pass, of course, but it was a truly meaningful event. I mean, people started being cynical where they hadn't been before. And keep in mind that when and I'll be quick on this, but when when JFK was killed, Malcolm X had less than 2 years to live. Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy had less than 5 years to live. Within the next 10 years, from Jimi Hendrix to John Coltrane to John Lennon, they died. They all died. And so
all right, you're not being quick. I want to move on to the next next topic before we completely run out of time. The other big thing that made the news, and it's of national interest, but particularly here in the Northeast, and that is the release of Michael Skakel. You're from from Connecticut. You have a perspective on this. First, I want to just ask you this, and we're literally down to a minute. Do you think Michael Skakel will ever see the inside of a jail cell again?
It's highly questionable. I mean, the crime occurred in 1975. You have just the logistical nightmare of the state's attorney's office and police getting together all the evidence, presenting the case again. Now, Skakel's lawyers have a playbook in terms of third-party culpability. I was there yesterday when he left the courthouse, and it's something that many people never thought that they would see. And his family applauded as he was granted $1.2 million bond. He'll have to wear a GPS tracking bracelet, and he has to ask for permission to leave the state of Connecticut. But it's highly questionable whether he will ever go back.
In just our last few seconds, Aisha, you know, there are a couple things that strike me. I think if he hadn't been in the Kennedy family, it wouldn't have taken 25 years to bring him to trial. And if he's not in the and if he hadn't been in the Kennedy family, he probably wouldn't even be released now.
I mean, I'm actually originally from Connecticut as well, and I remember it happening. I was younger. I was only 12 or 13 when he was convicted, but I remember it being a big deal when it happened. And I gotta say, like, I'm actually surprised looking back on it that he was even convicted and actually did serve time. Like, even if he doesn't go back, if the fact that he's a Kennedy and spent 11 years in jail is kind of surprising in itself.
It's a fascinating case, and it does beg the question that if he did not kill Martha Moxley, then who did, and where are they? We are unfortunately going to have to stop right now, but thank you all. Thanks to Wallace Ford, one of our favorites here, Neil Vigdor and Aisha Harris. Very good to meet you. Come back again sometime.
Definitely.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend.
Thanks.
Well, this is Arise America.